Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm bringing you a book review, technically for two books, and those are books 4 and 5 of the Star Wars The New Jedi Order series, specifically the Agents of Chaos Duology by James Luceno, which is Hero's Trial, Book 1, and Jedi Eclipse, which is Book 2. And as I said, these are books 4 and 5 in the New Jedi Order series. I will most likely be spoiling some parts of the previous 3 books, predominantly the first one, Vector Prime, because there is some important stuff that happens in that book that plays a big role in one of these books. So if you have not read Vector Prime and you don't want to be spoiled on that, then you may want to be wary of that. I will probably talk when I get to the spoiler, I will probably mention it. So if you want to, click off there or whatever, then you can. But just so you're aware, I will be spoiling the ending of Vector Prime in this video. So as I said, these are 2 books in the New Jedi Order series, which is a Star Wars Legends series that takes place about 25 years after the events of the original trilogy, which this series is basically about the invasion from outside of the known Star Wars galaxy of the Yuuzhan Vong, which are this extragalactic, I think that's the word anyway, from outside the galaxy. I think extragalactic is the correct word, but I may be wrong. But they are an alien race from outside the galaxy who have had their eye on the Star Wars galaxy for a while. After this series came out, there were some other expanded universe material that mentioned the Yuuzhan Vong, even as far back as like the Old Republic era, where they were spotted by like Canderous Ordo in the Knights of the Old Republic video game. He talks about that. So these guys have had their eye on the Star Wars galaxy for a while, and now they have decided to invade it. The New Jedi Order is basically the story of the Republic and other factions within the galaxy fighting off this invasion. And it is a pretty long series, especially for Star Wars, but in general, it's a long series. It's 19 books, which, given that your typical Star Wars book series is, I think on the longer end, aside from this series, is usually around 6 to 9 books, or something like that in terms of the adult novel series. I know like the middle grade series tend to be quite long as well. But this is a really long series, especially for Star Wars books, but even in general. There's a lot of books in this series, and it was written by multiple different authors, but it covers, I think, a very important part of the expanded universe history, so I think it's justified. I haven't read the whole thing myself, so I can't say for sure like if it could have been trimmed down at all, but it is a very long series, and these are books 4 and 5. So now that I've kind of given a whole bunch of background about this series, let's talk about the books themselves. So Hero's Trial is book 1, Jedi Eclipse is book 2. So in terms of positives for this duology, I'm going to first say that the first book, Hero's Trial, which I'll just talk about for a second here, and this is the part where I'm going to be spoiling Vector Prime, so sorry I didn't get to tell much. If you want my quick thoughts, I really like this one. Didn't like this one quite as much, but it was still okay. Quick thoughts, there you go. But spoilers for Vector Prime here on onwards. So this book I loved. It is probably my favorite book of the New Jedi Order so far. Not by a whole lot. I've considered most of the New Jedi Order books on the similar level of like really good to great. But this one is probably my favorite of them. This book focuses on a handful of different characters, but predominantly it focuses on Han Solo, which Han Solo in a lot of the other EU books that I've read, like the Thrawn trilogy or some of the other ones, or the Han Solo Adventures trilogy, which was released way back in like the late 70s, early 80s. Most of the time, Han stuff I have not been super in love with. I've generally liked it, but it hasn't always quite worked for me. The only case that I can think of where I really loved Han's plot was in the first first Jedi Academy book, Jedi Search. And in this book, I also absolutely loved his parts. And the main reason for that is final warning, spoilers for Vector Prime. In Vector Prime, at the very end, Chewbacca dies, protecting Han's children. And Han is, of course, very distraught about this. In the original trilogy, you see how much of a bond these two have, and also in the EU, they're always together, they're always going on adventures together, and all that stuff. Chewbacca is, of course, very much a part of Han Solo's life, so to have that taken away from him at the end of Vector Prime, from what I remember, you don't hear a whole lot about Han in books 2 and 3 of the series. It's been over a year since I read them, so I could be wrong. But that's something that I was really curious to see how it was handled, because for the most part, from what I can think of in terms of Star Wars books, you haven't really had a character of that caliber killed off before in the books, at least in the EU at this time. So this was, I think, the first death of a character from the original trilogy, at least out of the main group, the main characters. And so not only as a reader was it very impactful, but also for Han Solo. And I was interested in seeing how that would be handled. And I think it was handled excellently here. You really get a sense of Han's grieving, of his just, not really knowing what to do with himself and blaming himself for what happened and all this stuff. And it's just heartbreaking to read because, he lost his best friend, and that must really suck. And I think it hit even a little bit harder for me since I read it recently, because a few weeks ago or a month ago, I lost my grandmother, and that was the first big, most impactful passing away of a loved one that has happened in my life. And so I was able to really kind of connect with Han as I was reading this book and be like, I kind of understand what that might be like. And even aside from that, just the way that part of his plot in this book was written was really impactful. And it's the thing that really made me love this book so much. Of course, I enjoyed the rest of it as well, but that's really what got me invested in this one. And also, Han goes on some adventures in this book. He meets up with an old friend of his, and stuff like that, and goes on some different adventures and things, of course, as Han typically does. There's also the Yuuzhan Vong storyline within this book, which is fairly minor. I mean, it's in general not minor, but there are a couple of particular characters from the Yuuzhan Vong faction that this focuses on, and I enjoyed them as well. And there's, of course, other characters throughout here that are well done. Leia appears in here at times. Han's children, mainly Anakin and Jason, appear in this book. I don't believe Jaina Solo appears in this book, or in the second book for that matter. But they were all really good, and Han's interactions with those characters was really good. So in general, I really enjoyed this one a lot. My only real complaint with this one is that towards the end, it was kind of losing me a little bit. But in general, I did really enjoy it. On the other hand, we now have Jedi Eclipse. This one was a much more kind of overall meh feeling book for me. Not that I did not like it. It was certainly a decent book, but in general, it just did not have that same impact on me as the preceding book did. This book does focus on Han some, but it predominantly, I think, focuses on Leia. Which kind of makes sense with this duology. Han and Leia in the EU at this point are married, so have one focus a lot on Han, have one focus a lot on Leia, kind of makes sense. And her story is a bit more political. It's more about trying to recruit different worlds and people to help the Republic fight off the Yuuzhan Vong. Because at this point she is a representative of the Republic. I can't remember to what particular position she is, but she is very much a part of the New Republic and is a representative of them. and all that stuff. So she does that in this book a bit, which is enjoyable, but again, didn't really grab me a huge amount. You have Han Solo doing some stuff in this book as well, and again, while I enjoyed it, was not quite as impressive as what was in this one for me. But again, it was still decent. He goes on some more adventures with his friend Droma, and get involved in some very interesting situations, but not ones that I found incredibly compelling necessarily. Then you've also got some of the Jedi characters like Kip Duron and Ganner Rhysode, who are in this book a little bit as well, and I enjoy those characters. I especially always enjoy seeing Kip Duron because he was introduced in the Jedi Academy trilogy, which, aside from the novelization of The Force Unleashed, which I don't really count because it's a novelization, aside from that, the Jedi Academy trilogy was the first EU stuff that I read, so it's always nice to see Kip again, and I enjoyed him and Ganner in this book. And then you also have Anakin and Jason coming in at some points during this book, and they play a pretty significant role in the climax of this book towards the end. And I enjoyed that as well. But in general, this one for me was just a bit more of a meh sort of book. I feel bad not having as much to say about it because I feel like I went on quite a while with this one. But in general, this one just was not as much of an interesting book to me, although it was still a decent one. So overall, I did generally enjoy this duology a decent amount. Of course, averaging it out between something I really loved and something I thought was just okay, you end up still with something that I liked. So in terms of ratings for these two books, the first one, Hero's Trial, I would probably give an 8.5, I think. Again, really loved all the stuff with Han, and some of the other stuff was good as well. And there's also a plot line with like Mara Jade being sick and stuff going on with that as well that I forgot to mention. There's some interesting stuff going on in this book, but like I said, towards the end it did lose me a little bit, and there were, really aside from the Han Solo stuff, none of the other plot lines really grabbed me a huge amount, but the Han Solo stuff really made up for it. Whereas Jedi Eclipse, I would say this one's probably more of a 6.5, which is a pretty big jump down from the first book, but this one was still okay. Just like I said, not much about it really grabbed me a huge amount. I would say actually within this duology, I got my favorite New Jedi Order book so far, and probably my least favorite as well. Which again isn't saying much because these are still, even this one still I think is decent, but in general, a decent duology with some really high highs and some kind of meh sort of lows, I think, but still a solid duology. And I'm looking forward to reading more of the New Jedi Order after this. So that's pretty much all for this video. Let me know down in the comments if you have read these books or any of the New Jedi Order books, and if you happen to have read all of the books, or even most of them, let me know what you think of the series. I have most of the books currently. I think there's only a few that I'm missing, and I'm hoping I can get at least most or all of the way through it this year. So I'm very much looking forward to continuing this series. It's been really interesting so far, so I'm very excited to continue it. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments, and that is pretty much it for this video, so I will see you guys next time.